This secret love letter was meant for you. Your soulmate never had the courage to send it. Stay here for a moment and don't rush past this, because what you're about to hear was never meant to be spoken out loud. It was written in silence, rewritten in the mind 100 times, and then hidden away out of fear. This is the letter your soulmate never had the courage to send, not because the feelings weren't real, but because they were too real. I don't know how to start this without my hands shaking, so I'll start honestly. I've thought about you more times than I'd ever admit. In moments when the world was loud and in moments when everything finally went quiet. You show up in the in-between spaces of my life, the ones no one else sees. And every time you do, I pretend I don't notice, even though my heart always does. There were so many times I almost reached out. Times my fingers hovered over the screen, typing your name, deleting it, typing again. I told myself it wasn't the right moment. I told myself I didn't want to disturb your peace. But the truth I never said out loud is that I was scared. Scared that if I said everything I felt, I'd lose you completely instead of just missing you quietly. I want you to know something I never said clearly enough. You mattered to me in a way that didn't fade when circumstances changed. Even when I tried to move on, even when I distracted myself, even when I smiled and acted fine, there was a part of me that stayed with you. Not obsessively. Not dramatically. Just steadily. Like a song that plays softly in the background no matter what else is on. I didn't fall for you in a loud, cinematic way. I fell for you slowly. In the way you listened. In the way you noticed things other people missed. In how you made space instead of noise. And that kind of love scared me, because it wasn't fleeting. It felt like something that could actually change my life if I let it. There were moments when I pulled back, and I need you to know why. It wasn't because I didn't care. It was because I cared more than I knew how to handle. I didn't trust myself with something that mattered that much. I was afraid that if I leaned in fully, I'd either disappoint you or expose parts of myself I wasn't ready to face. Sometimes I wonder if you noticed the way my tone changed around you. How I was softer. More careful. How I chose my words like they mattered more. That wasn't accidental. That was me trying to protect something fragile, both in you and in myself. I never meant to confuse you. I never meant to leave you guessing. I just didn't know how to bridge the gap between what I felt and what I was brave enough to say. So I stayed silent, hoping maybe you'd feel it anyway. Hoping somehow you'd just know. The hardest part is that I always knew you deserved clarity. You deserved honesty. And I hate that my fear may have felt like indifference to you. It wasn't. It was uncertainty battling emotion, and uncertainty won more often than it should have. There were nights I imagined telling you everything. Telling you that you felt like home in a way I didn't expect. That being around you made me want to be more present, more real. That you didn't just attract me, you grounded me. And grounding someone can be terrifying when you're used to running. I want you to know that when you pulled away, it hurt more than I showed. When you went quiet, I felt it. When you stopped reaching, I noticed. I told myself I had no right to feel that way because I never claimed you. But feelings don't follow rules. They just exist. I carried this love quietly because I didn't want to burden you with something unfinished. I didn't want to hand you a feeling without offering stability alongside it. And at the time, I didn't feel stable enough in myself to promise anything real. So I chose silence, thinking it was kinder. I'm not sure it was. If I'm honest, part of me hoped time would dull this. That distance would erase it. But it didn't. It just softened the edges while keeping the core intact. You stayed meaningful even when life moved forward. This letter exists because there are things I never said that still live inside me. Because even now, I care about how you feel. About whether you ever doubted your worth because of my hesitation. I want you to know this clearly: my silence was never a reflection of your value. You were never too much. You were never an option. You were simply someone who arrived at a time when I was still learning how to choose with courage instead of comfort. I don't know where you are now. I don't know what your life looks like or who stands beside you. And this letter isn't meant to disrupt your peace. It's meant to give you truth, even if it comes late. Truth that says you were loved, even if it wasn't expressed the way it should have been. If our paths never cross again, I still want you to carry this knowing: you left an imprint. You mattered. You were seen more deeply than you realized. And the connection we shared was real, even if it remained unspoken. And if, by some chance, you still feel a pull when you think of me, know that it wasn't one-sided. It never was. I just didn't know how to meet it fully at the time. This letter stayed unsent because I was afraid of what honesty would require of me. But the feelings inside it were always true. And if nothing else, I hope this gives you peace. Stay with me a little longer, because part 2 of this letter goes deeper into the things I never allowed myself to admit, even in my own head. Writing this feels like opening a door I kept locked, not because I forgot what was inside, but because I always knew exactly what I'd find there. You. Always you. There's something I need you to understand before anything else. My silence was not emptiness. It was restraint. Every time I chose not to speak, it was because I was holding back words that felt too powerful to release carelessly. I was afraid that once spoken, they would demand action, courage, and change I wasn't ready to face. So I kept them folded inside me, convincing myself that quiet love was safer than honest love. I watched you more than you realized. Not in a distant way, but in a way that paid attention to patterns. I noticed how you handled disappointment. How you showed up even when you were tired. How you tried to be strong without asking for too much. And the more I saw, the heavier my feelings became, because loving you wasn't just about desire, it came with responsibility. There were moments I almost broke. Moments when you said something so genuine, so unguarded, that it made my chest ache. Moments when I wanted to reach out and say, I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. But fear stopped me. Fear that I wouldn't live up to the version of myself you deserved. Fear that I'd promise presence and then fail to sustain it. I need to say this clearly, even if it's late: you never imagined the connection. It wasn't one-sided. When you felt the tension, the pauses, the unspoken pull, that was real. I felt it too. I just chose to sit with the discomfort instead of stepping into the risk. Sometimes I wonder if you thought you were asking for too much. If my hesitation made you question your needs, your timing, or your worth. If that happened, I'm sorry in a way words can't fully carry. You weren't asking for too much. You were asking the wrong person to be brave at the right time. I didn't lack feelings. I lacked readiness. And those two things are often confused, even by the people living inside them. There were nights I replayed our conversations, wondering what would have happened if I'd been just a little more honest. If I'd said, "This matters to me," instead of hiding behind casualness. If I'd admitted that you weren't just someone I enjoyed talking to, but someone who changed the way I thought about connection altogether. You didn't just make me feel something, you made me see something. You showed me how deep emotional safety could feel when it's real. And that scared me, because once you see that depth, surface-level connection stops satisfying you. I knew that choosing you would require letting go of old patterns I wasn't ready to release yet. I want you to know that when you stepped back, when you protected yourself, I understood more than you think. I didn't blame you. I admired you. Part of me wished I'd had that same clarity earlier. Part of me still wishes I could go back and meet you with the courage you deserved. But life doesn't move backward. It teaches through contrast. There's a quiet grief that comes with knowing you might have been the right person at the wrong time. Not because the love wasn't strong enough, but because the timing demanded growth I hadn't completed yet. That grief doesn't fade easily. It just settles into a softer ache. If you ever wondered whether I replaced you, whether someone else filled the space you left, the honest answer is no one ever occupied it the same way. Others came and went, but they didn't reach the part of me you touched. That space remained uniquely yours, not out of loyalty, but out of truth. I also need you to hear this: I never wanted you to wait for me. I never wanted to be the reason you paused your life or dimmed your joy. If you moved on, if you found happiness, if you chose someone who met you fully, I hope you did it without guilt. Loving you quietly doesn't give me ownership over your future. This letter isn't a request. It's not a plea. It's not an attempt to reopen something that may already be complete. It's an offering of truth, because truth is the one thing I withheld that I shouldn't have. You deserve to know that you were not invisible. You were not misunderstood. You were not misread. You were felt deeply, just not honored loudly enough. If our story remains unfinished, I will carry that as my lesson, not your burden. And if by some twist of fate our paths cross again, I hope I would recognize the moment for what it is, and be brave enough to meet it differently. Until then, I want you to walk forward knowing this: the love you give is powerful. It changes people, even when they don't know how to receive it properly. It changed me. This letter stayed hidden because fear kept my hands still. But the feelings inside it were always alive. And if nothing else, I hope reading this allows you to release any doubt you carried in silence. You were loved. You mattered. And you always will, in the quiet places where truth lives. Stay with me a little longer, because this part is the hardest one to write and the most honest one to read. This is the part where I stop hiding behind explanations and finally sit with the truth of what I did and what I didn't do. This is the part where I stop pretending silence was noble and admit that it was, in many ways, a failure of courage. I need you to know that there were days when I almost convinced myself I didn't feel this strongly. I tried to label what I felt for you as admiration, comfort, familiarity, anything that sounded safer than love. But the truth has a way of resurfacing, especially in moments when you least expect it. In quiet rooms. Late nights. Early mornings when the world hasn't started demanding anything yet. You were there in those moments, and that's how I knew I was lying to myself. There was something about the way you existed that made me confront parts of myself I'd spent years avoiding. You didn't push. You didn't demand. You simply showed up as you were, and somehow that was enough to make me question my own emotional honesty. Being seen without being chased can be unsettling when you're used to hiding behind control. I think I was afraid of how natural it felt with you. Afraid that if I let myself fall into it, I'd lose the distance I used to protect myself. You didn't feel like a distraction or a thrill. You felt like a mirror. And mirrors don't let you escape yourself. There were moments when you trusted me with pieces of your heart, small ones at first, and I felt the weight of them immediately. I knew those pieces were fragile. I knew they deserved care. And instead of stepping up fully, I hesitated. Not because I didn't value them, but because I didn't trust myself to hold them the way they deserve to be held. That's the part that still sits heavy with me. Knowing that my fear may have translated into distance for you. Knowing that what felt like self-protection for me may have felt like rejection for you. I wish I could tell you that I didn't realize it at the time, but that wouldn't be true. I felt the tension. I felt the shift. I just didn't know how to bridge it without risking everything. I want you to understand something deeply. I wasn't unsure about you. I was unsure about myself. Unsure about my readiness. Unsure about my ability to show up consistently. Unsure about whether I could unlearn old patterns fast enough to meet you where you already were. There were days I thought about telling you exactly how I felt, not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet, honest one. I imagined saying, I care about you more than I'm showing, and I'm scared of what that means. But every time I got close to that truth, fear stepped in and reminded me of all the times I'd failed before, all the times I'd wanted to be better and hadn't been. So I stayed quiet. I stayed careful. I stayed just far enough away to avoid full vulnerability. And in doing so, I created the very distance I was afraid of. If you ever wondered why I seemed present one moment and withdrawn the next, this is why. It wasn't a game. It wasn't manipulation. It was conflict. A constant push and pull between wanting to move toward you and wanting to protect myself from the responsibility that came with that closeness. I also want to acknowledge something important. You didn't owe me patience. You didn't owe me understanding. You didn't owe me time. If you walked away, if you chose yourself, if you decided you needed more than what I could offer at that moment, you were right to do so. Loving quietly does not give someone permission to keep someone waiting. There's a humility that comes with realizing you might have missed something meaningful because you weren't ready when it arrived. That humility has stayed with me. It has changed how I approach connection now. It has forced me to look at the cost of silence, not just the comfort of it. You taught me that love doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it arrives gently, asking to be acknowledged, not chased. And I failed to acknowledge it the way I should have. If this letter reaches you at a time when you've healed, when you've grown, when you've found peace, please don't let it disturb that. This isn't meant to reopen wounds. It's meant to close one that may have lingered without explanation. And if a part of you still wonders whether you were enough, whether you misread things, whether you imagined the connection, I need you to hear this clearly: you didn't imagine it. You didn't misread it. You weren't wrong. I was just not ready to meet it with the courage it required. I don't know what the future holds for either of us. I don't know if our paths will ever cross again in a meaningful way. But I do know this. Knowing you changed how I understand love. It showed me that depth matters. That emotional safety matters. That presence matters more than perfection. If nothing else, let this be the truth you carry forward: the love you offer leaves a mark. Even on people who don't know how to receive it at the time. It left one on me. This letter stayed unsent because I didn't want to face my own fear. But the truth inside it has been waiting patiently, just like you once did. And for that, I'm sorry. Stay with me through this part, because this is where the letter stops circling around the past and finally stands in the present. This is where I admit not just what I felt then, but what those feelings turned into after you were no longer close enough to reach. Distance has a way of clarifying things that fear once blurred, and time has been honest with me in ways I couldn't be with myself back then. After you stepped back, after the quiet settled where our connection used to live, I noticed how much of my emotional world had been shaped around you without me ever naming it. Songs didn't hit the same. Conversations felt flatter. Even laughter felt slightly off, like something essential was missing. That's when it became impossible to pretend you were just another chapter. You were a turning point. I want to tell you something I never said because it sounded too vulnerable at the time. You made me want to grow. Not impress. Not perform. Grow. Being around you highlighted the gaps in me, not as flaws to be ashamed of, but as places that needed honesty and work. And instead of rising to that challenge, I stepped away from it. That's a regret I carry quietly, not as punishment, but as a reminder. There were moments after you left when I almost reached out again. Moments when I thought, maybe now I'm ready to say what I couldn't before. But then I thought about the risk of reopening something without being able to offer more than words. I didn't want to disturb your healing just to ease my conscience. Loving someone also means knowing when to stay away. I need you to know that I didn't move on easily. I didn't replace you emotionally, even if from the outside it may have looked that way. I learned how to function without you, but that's different from forgetting you. You became a reference point in my mind for what real connection feels like. Not perfect. Not effortless. But meaningful. Sometimes I caught myself comparing others to you, not in looks or personality, but in presence. In how safe I felt opening up. In how natural conversation flowed. And often, the comparison wasn't fair to them, because they weren't meant to be you. That's when I realized you hadn't just been someone I cared about, you had shifted my standards without ever trying to. I also want to acknowledge something important. There's a difference between loving someone and being able to love them well. At the time, I had the feeling but not the capacity. And capacity matters. It's built through self-awareness, emotional responsibility, and courage. I didn't have enough of those then. I'm still working on them now. You once showed me what it looks like to be emotionally available without losing yourself. I see that now. Back then, it intimidated me. I mistook my discomfort for incompatibility when it was really a call to grow. I understand now that the people who challenge our defenses are often the ones who matter most. If I could sit across from you today, I wouldn't rush to explain or justify anything. I would listen first. I would ask how you experienced me. I would hold space for whatever truth you needed to speak, even if it was uncomfortable. That's something I've learned since knowing you. That love isn't about being right, it's about being present. There's something else I need to say, even if it's difficult. I don't expect forgiveness. This letter isn't written with that expectation. Forgiveness is a gift, not a debt. If you've already forgiven me in your own way, I'm grateful. If you haven't, that's okay too. Your healing doesn't require my redemption. What I hope more than anything is that you never internalized my silence as a reflection of your worth. I hope you never shrank yourself, softened your needs, or questioned your intuition because of how I showed up. If you ever did, I wish I could take that back. You deserved clarity, not confusion. You deserved someone who could meet you without hesitation, who could say, "I choose you," without fear shaking their voice. I wasn't that person then. I'm learning to become that person now, not for you specifically, but because knowing you showed me why it matters. I think about the version of you I knew sometimes and wonder how much you've grown since then. I hope you're surrounded by people who see you clearly. I hope you're loved out loud, not quietly. I hope your life feels expansive and aligned. And if someone is loving you now, I hope they understand how rare that is. This letter exists not to rewrite history, but to complete it. To place truth where there was once only silence. To let you know that the connection mattered enough to be named, even if it came later than it should have. There are loves that arrive to stay, and there are loves that arrive to teach. You were both. You taught me the cost of emotional avoidance. You taught me that timing isn't just fate, it's readiness. And you taught me that the deepest connections don't fade just because they're unfinished. If this letter brings up emotion for you, I hope it also brings resolution. Not because it fixes the past, but because it fills in the blanks. Sometimes knowing the truth is enough to let something rest. I'm not asking for anything from you. Not a response. Not a second chance. Just your understanding, if you're willing to offer it. And if not, your peace is still what matters most. I'll carry this with me as I continue forward, the lesson, the memory, the gratitude. And I'll always respect the place you hold in my story, even if I only get to honor it from afar. This letter was unsent because I wasn't brave enough then. It's written now because honesty matters more than comfort. And wherever you are, however you're living, I hope you feel this truth settle gently in your heart. You were never forgotten, never dismissed, and never unimportant. Stay with me through this final stretch of the letter, because this is where everything that was unsaid finally exhales. This is where I stop explaining myself and simply tell you what remains after time, distance, and growth have stripped everything else away. What's left is quieter now, but it's also truer. I've realized something important over time. The love I felt for you didn't disappear when we stopped speaking. It didn't dissolve when life moved on. It transformed. It became a kind of respect that lives beneath memory. A gratitude that doesn't ask for anything back. A tenderness that wishes you well even from a distance. That's how I know it was real. There were moments after everything ended when I tried to harden myself. I told myself that if it didn't work out, it must not have mattered as much as I thought. But that was a lie I couldn't maintain for long. Meaning doesn't require permanence. Some connections matter precisely because they change us and then let us go. I want you to know that the space you left in my life wasn't filled by noise or distraction. It became a place of reflection. A place where I learned to sit with my shortcomings instead of outrunning them. Losing the chance to be fully honest with you forced me to confront how often I'd chosen comfort over courage in my life. I think that's one of the hardest truths to accept. Sometimes the greatest loss isn't the person, but the version of ourselves we failed to become when it mattered. You represented a version of me that could have grown faster, loved braver, shown up more fully. I didn't meet that moment. And that's something I've had to forgive myself for, slowly and honestly. If you ever felt like you were waiting alone, I need you to hear this now: you weren't invisible to me. I felt the weight of your patience even when I didn't deserve it. And I'm deeply aware that patience, when it goes unrecognized, can turn into pain. I regret that my fear made you carry that. There's a specific kind of sadness that comes from knowing someone offered you something genuine and you weren't ready to receive it. It's not dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. It just sits quietly and reshapes how you see future opportunities. I carry that sadness not as punishment, but as wisdom. I want to tell you about the ways you stayed with me in small, unexpected moments. In how I learned to pause before responding instead of reacting. In how I became more attentive to people's emotional cues. In how I learned that consistency matters more than intensity. Those lessons didn't come from books or heartbreaks. They came from knowing you. You taught me, without trying, that love isn't proven by how strongly you feel, but by how responsibly you act. That care without clarity can still cause harm. And that silence, even when well-intentioned, can echo louder than words. If I could rewrite anything, it wouldn't be to change how you showed up. You were honest in the ways you knew how to be. I would rewrite my response. I would choose transparency over restraint. I would risk the discomfort of truth instead of hiding behind ambiguity. I would trust that honesty, even if it led to loss, would have been kinder than silence. But life doesn't allow rewrites. It allows integration. And integrated into me now is a deeper respect for emotional responsibility. A commitment to speak when something matters. A refusal to let fear masquerade as patience again. You were part of that awakening. I don't know if you still think about me. And I won't pretend that knowing would change anything now. What matters is that if you ever did wonder whether the connection was real, this letter answers that clearly. It was real. It mattered. And it left a mark that shaped who I am becoming. I hope that wherever you are, you feel chosen in ways I couldn't offer then. I hope someone meets your openness with equal openness. I hope you never again feel like you have to read between the lines to understand where you stand. And if you've already found that, I'm genuinely glad. Love shouldn't be delayed by someone else's fear. This letter isn't an attempt to reopen a door. It's a way of closing one gently, without pretending it was never there. Some doors don't need to be walked through again to be honored. I want you to walk forward without carrying unanswered questions about us. Without wondering if you imagine things. Without shrinking your heart because someone else didn't know how to meet it. You were enough then. You're enough now. And you didn't need to change to be loved more clearly. If this letter reaches you at a time when you're at peace, let it rest lightly. If it reaches you during a moment of doubt, let it steady you. Let it remind you that your capacity for connection is real and impactful, even when it's not met perfectly. I'll carry you as a chapter one respect deeply. Not with longing, not with regret alone, but with gratitude for what knowing you taught me. This letter was meant for you not to ask for anything, but to return something that was owed, truth. And with that truth finally spoken, I hope you feel lighter, clearer, and affirmed in the quiet places where meaning lives. Wherever you are, I wish you a life that feels chosen, steady, and full. This is where I let the words rest. Stay with me through this last part, because this is where the letter finally releases what it's been holding all along. Not in a dramatic ending, not in a plea, but in a quiet understanding that feels complete. This is the part written from acceptance, not longing. From clarity, not confusion. From love that no longer needs to hide or ask to be chosen. I've come to understand that some connections aren't meant to stay in our lives forever, but they are meant to stay in us. You became one of those for me. Not because we didn't try hard enough, but because the timing asked us to meet versions of ourselves that were still forming. And while I didn't meet that moment the way I wish I had, I did not walk away unchanged. There was a time when I thought closure meant explanation. That if I could just explain myself well enough, everything would settle. But closure doesn't come from words alone. It comes from truth landing gently instead of being forced. It comes from letting go of the need to be understood perfectly and trusting that what mattered most was felt, even if it was never spoken. I no longer carry guilt the way I once did. I've learned that guilt without growth is just another form of avoidance. What I carry now is responsibility. The kind that teaches you to show up differently next time. The kind that makes you braver with honesty, quicker with clarity, and slower with silence. You were the reason I learned that waiting too long to speak can cost you more than rejection ever could. That withholding love doesn't protect anyone. That emotional courage isn't loud or dramatic, but it is necessary. These lessons didn't come easily, and they didn't come quickly, but they stayed. I also want you to know that I no longer look back at us with only regret. There is tenderness there now. Gratitude. Even a quiet smile sometimes. Because not every meaningful experience ends in togetherness. Some end in wisdom. Some end in growth. Some end in a deeper understanding of self. If you ever felt like you were standing at the edge of something with me, waiting for me to step forward, I want you to know that edge changed me. It showed me where I hesitated. Where I hid. Where I needed to grow. And while I didn't step forward then, I don't stand in that same place anymore. I hope that wherever life has taken you, you no longer doubt your intuition. I hope you trust that pull you feel when something is real. I hope you never again settle for half answers or quiet uncertainty. You deserve clarity. You always did. And if you ever think back on me, I hope it's not with pain. I hope it's with the understanding that sometimes people care deeply but don't yet know how to act in alignment with that care. That doesn't excuse the impact, but it explains the silence without diminishing your worth. This letter was never meant to rewrite the past. It was meant to honor it. To give shape to what existed even when it wasn't acknowledged. To say plainly what fear once softened and hid. I've learned now that love doesn't need perfect timing to be real, but it does need courage to be lived. And while I didn't live it fully with you, the love itself was not a mistake. It was a teacher. If this is the last time my words reach you in this way, let it be enough. Let it be complete. Let it settle without demanding more from either of us. Some truths are meant to be known, not acted upon. You don't owe me a response. You don't owe me forgiveness. You don't owe me space in your present life. This letter exists so that you never have to wonder again whether what you felt was imagined. It wasn't. You mattered. You changed me. And the care I felt for you was real, even when it wasn't expressed the way it should have been. I release this now without expectation. Without attachment. With respect for who you were then and who you are now. And with gratitude for what this connection taught me about love, courage, and responsibility. May your life feel aligned. May your relationships feel safe and clear. May you never again have to guess where you stand. This letter was meant for you. Not to pull you back, but to let you move forward lighter. And with that, I let it rest. Stay with me a little longer, because part 7 isn't about reopening anything or adding new emotion. It's about what happens after truth has been spoken and allowed to rest. This is the part no one talks about, the quiet aftermath, when nothing is demanded anymore, and meaning settles into its final shape. After acceptance comes a strange calm. Not relief exactly, and not sadness either. It's the calm of knowing you don't have to carry a question forward. You don't have to keep wondering what something was or whether it mattered. You don't have to hold space for what might have been. The wondering ends here. And in its place is something gentler, something steadier. I've learned that when love is finally named honestly, even after the fact, it loses its sharp edges. It no longer pulls or tugs. It simply becomes part of the landscape of who you are. That's where you live for me now. Not in longing, not in regret, but in the quiet geography of memory that shaped my emotional map. There's a freedom in admitting that something mattered without needing it to continue. For a long time, I thought that if love didn't lead to permanence, it must have been incomplete. I don't believe that anymore. Some connections are complete because they awaken us, not because they stay. I think of you now with clarity instead of ache. With respect instead of fear. And that shift didn't happen because time erased anything, it happened because truth finally replaced avoidance. Truth has a way of softening even the most complicated feelings. I also want to say something that feels important now: you don't carry responsibility for what I learned. You don't owe me growth, patience, or understanding. The lessons I gained from knowing you are mine to carry forward, not yours to justify. You gave what you gave honestly. I'm the one who had to learn how to receive. If this letter series feels long, it's because some truths take time to fully surface. Not because they're complicated, but because they deserve care. You weren't a passing moment in my life. You were a turning point. And turning points deserve reflection, not reduction. I've noticed that when people talk about moving on, they often mean forgetting. But forgetting was never the goal. Integration was. Carrying forward what mattered without dragging the weight of what didn't happen. That's what this part represents. You might wonder why I needed to write this much. Why words kept coming even after closure seemed reached. It's because closure isn't a single moment, it's a process. And this process wasn't about you coming back. It was about me finally arriving at myself. I don't imagine conversations with you anymore. I don't rehearse explanations. I don't replay moments wishing I'd said something different. Those habits have fallen away naturally, not because I forced them to, but because they're no longer needed. When truth is fully acknowledged, the mind stops circling. What remains now is gratitude without attachment. A rare kind of appreciation that doesn't ask to be validated. I appreciate who you were in my life and who you helped me become. That appreciation stands on its own. If you're reading this at a time when your life feels full, I hope these words simply pass through you like a soft breeze, noticed, but not disruptive. If you're reading this at a time when you're questioning past connections, I hope it brings reassurance rather than reopening old doors. You were never wrong for wanting clarity. You were never wrong for expecting presence. You were never wrong for trusting what you felt. If there was misalignment, it wasn't because you asked for too much. It was because I hadn't yet learned how to meet something real. I also want to acknowledge something quietly. Sometimes the people who don't stay are the ones who prepare us to stay better later. They show us the cost of avoidance. They teach us what we don't want to repeat. You were part of that preparation for me. There's no dramatic ending here because life rarely offers those. Most endings are quiet. They look like peace. They look like no longer needing answers. They look like remembering without emotion pulling you backward. I don't carry you with sadness anymore. I carry you with respect. And respect is the most honest form of love once attachment dissolves. If our paths never cross again, this is still complete. If they do, they'll meet different versions of us, versions shaped by everything that came after. Either way, there's no unfinished business left in my heart. This part exists simply to say, it's okay to let meaningful things rest without needing to relive them. It's okay to honor something without holding on to it. It's okay to move forward knowing that what mattered did its job. You did your job in my life by being exactly who you were. I did mine by finally telling the truth, even if it came late. Nothing more is required now. So this is where the letter truly ends, not with goodbye, not with longing, but with quiet respect for what was real and what is now complete. Wherever you are, I hope you feel settled in your choices. I hope your connections are clear and nourishing. I hope you trust your instincts and honor your needs without apology. This story doesn't continue because it doesn't need to. It did what it came to do. And with that understanding, I let the last word fall gently into silence. Stay with me a little longer, because part 8 is not about adding more emotion to the story, but about honoring what remains once everything loud has already been said. This is the part that lives after reflection, after understanding, after acceptance. It's the quiet continuation that doesn't ask for attention but still deserves to be acknowledged. What I've learned now is that some connections don't end with distance, they end with integration. You stop carrying them in your chest as weight, and instead they settle into your spine as strength. That's where you are now for me, not as a question, not as a wound, but as something that quietly shaped how I stand in the world. There was a time when I thought moving forward meant closing the door completely. Cutting off memory. Avoiding your name in my thoughts. Pretending it didn't matter as much as it did. But that kind of erasing never really works. What works is allowing memory to exist without controlling you. That's what this stage looks like. I don't think about what could have been anymore. Not because it wasn't meaningful, but because I've made peace with the fact that meaning doesn't depend on outcome. What we shared did exactly what it was meant to do. It arrived, it changed me, and it released me. That's not failure. That's completion. Sometimes I still notice traces of you in unexpected places. In how I pause before responding. In how I don't ignore discomfort anymore. In how I speak sooner when something matters. These aren't reminders that hurt. They're reminders that growth sticks. I want to say this clearly, in case it ever crossed your mind differently. You were never a lesson that came with bitterness. You were a lesson wrapped in respect. There's a difference. You didn't teach me through loss alone, you taught me through depth. Through showing me what emotional honesty feels like when it's present, and what it costs when it's withheld. I also understand now that silence doesn't always come from lack of care. But I also understand that impact matters more than intention. Holding both of those truths at once has made me more compassionate, not just toward you, but toward myself. Growth without self-forgiveness is incomplete. If you ever wondered whether time softened what I felt, the answer is yes. But not in the way people assume. It didn't make it smaller. It made it clearer. It removed confusion and left behind essence. And the essence was respect, gratitude, and a quiet affection that no longer asks for space in your life. That's the kind of feeling that doesn't interfere. It doesn't intrude. It simply exists, peacefully, in the background of who I've become. I've also learned something important about courage. Courage isn't always the moment you speak. It's also the moment you stop needing to. When you can let truth rest without pushing it further, that's courage too. That's where I am now. This part of the letter isn't meant to stir anything up inside you. It's meant to settle something, gently. To let you know that nothing is unfinished on my side. There's no resentment left. No longing pulling at old threads. Just clarity. And clarity feels surprisingly light. If our lives move in completely different directions, and they likely will, I'm okay with that. Not because what we shared didn't matter, but because it mattered enough to prepare me for healthier, braver connections ahead. That's not loss. That's continuity. You may never read this. And that's okay. This part exists whether or not it's witnessed. Some truths don't need an audience. They just need to be acknowledged once, fully. I no longer carry the urge to explain myself to the past. I carry the responsibility to show up better in the present. That responsibility is something I take seriously now. And in that way, what we shared continues forward, not as memory, but as behavior. There's a calm confidence that comes with knowing you won't repeat the same silence again. That if something matters, you'll name it. That if someone matters, you won't hide behind hesitation. That confidence didn't come easily, but it came honestly. You were part of that. I hope, wherever you are, you feel rooted in your choices. I hope your life feels aligned with who you are now, not who you used to be. I hope the people around you meet you with clarity and consistency. And if they don't, I hope you walk away without doubting yourself. You were never hard to love. You were just present at a moment when I was still learning how. This is not nostalgia speaking. It's acknowledgement. There's a difference. Nostalgia pulls you backward. Acknowledgement lets you move forward without denying what mattered. I don't carry a version of you frozen in time anymore. I trust that you've grown, changed, evolved. And I respect that journey even if I don't witness it. This part doesn't need a conclusion, because it's not closing anything new. It's simply confirming what's already settled. Everything that needed to be said has been said. Everything that needed to be felt has been felt. Everything that needed to be learned has been integrated. And what remains is quiet, solid, and complete. If this is the last page of the letter you ever encounter, let it leave you with one simple truth: you were never misunderstood, and you were never insignificant. You mattered in a way that didn't need permanence to be real. That's all this part exists to hold. Nothing more. Nothing less. And with that, the letter doesn't end loudly, it fades gently, the way things do when they've fulfilled their purpose. Stay with me for this part too, because part 9 isn't about memory anymore. It's about what lives quietly after memory stops asking for attention. This is the part where the story no longer feels like something that happened to us, but something that passed through us and left us steadier than before. I've noticed that when something truly completes, it doesn't announce itself. There's no dramatic feeling of, "this is over." Instead, there's a gentle sense that you no longer carry it forward with effort. It doesn't tug at your thoughts. It doesn't ask for interpretation. It simply exists as a fact, like a chapter you've read fully and don't need to reread to understand. That's where this connection rests now. I don't replay moments anymore. Not the good ones, not the difficult ones. They've settled into a quiet neutrality. They don't demand emotion, because the emotion has already done its work. That's how I know this isn't suppression, it's resolution. For a long time, I thought unresolved connections stayed unresolved because something was missing. Another conversation. Another explanation. Another chance. But what I've learned is that most things remain unfinished only because we refuse to accept what they already gave us. Once we accept the lesson, the connection doesn't need to continue. You gave me awareness. Awareness of how deeply silence can affect someone. Awareness of how important it is to act in alignment with what you feel. Awareness that care without courage still causes harm, even if it's unintentional. Those lessons are now woven into how I move through the world. I no longer feel the need to justify why things unfolded the way they did. I don't defend the past version of myself, and I don't shame them either. I understand them. And understanding has a way of dissolving conflict internally. There's something freeing about no longer needing to be understood by someone from your past. You stop rehearsing explanations. You stop wishing you could go back and say things differently. You accept that growth doesn't require an audience from before. It only requires honesty going forward. If I'm being truthful, part of me once feared that letting this rest would mean losing something important. But what I've realized is that nothing real was lost. What was real transformed. It became discernment. It became emotional literacy. It became a quieter, stronger version of myself. And that version doesn't look backward often. Not because the past was insignificant, but because the present is full. I've learned that closure isn't something another person gives you. It's something you allow yourself once you stop waiting for validation that may never come. The moment you trust your own understanding, closure happens naturally. That trust didn't exist in me before you. It exists now. I also want to say something that feels important at this stage: you don't owe anyone access to the healed version of you. Just because you've grown doesn't mean you have to reopen old doors. Growth isn't an invitation, it's a boundary. If our paths were to cross again in any form, they would meet different people. People who know themselves better. People who communicate more clearly. People who don't hide behind uncertainty. And while that thought once stirred emotion, it doesn't anymore. It simply feels factual. Sometimes I think about how easily people confuse intensity with depth. What we shared wasn't loud. It wasn't chaotic. But it was deep enough to teach me restraint, patience, and responsibility. Those are not small things. I don't romanticize what we had. I respect it. Romanticizing keeps you stuck. Respect lets you move on without bitterness. There's a peace that comes when you realize you don't need to revisit something to honor it. You don't need reminders. You don't need symbols. You don't need explanations. You just carry the truth quietly and let life continue. That's what this part represents. I've noticed how differently I show up now in connection. I speak sooner. I clarify instead of assuming. I don't let fear decide for me. And when I feel hesitation, I examine it instead of hiding behind it. That change didn't come from theory. It came from experience. From you. And that's why I don't regret knowing you, even if the outcome wasn't what it could have been. Regret focuses on what didn't happen. Gratitude focuses on what did. And what did happen mattered. If you ever felt like you were left holding questions alone, I hope you no longer carry that weight. I hope you trust that your intuition was accurate. I hope you've learned to walk away from ambiguity faster and toward clarity sooner. You weren't asking for too much. You were asking for alignment. And alignment is rare. This part isn't meant to be read with emotion swelling in your chest. It's meant to be read with a sense of calm. With the understanding that nothing is missing anymore. Nothing is unresolved. Nothing is calling you back. Some stories don't end with togetherness. They end with wisdom. And wisdom doesn't linger, it integrates. That's what has happened here. I don't think about how this could have continued. I think about how it prepared me to continue differently. That's the only continuation that matters now. If this is the last part you ever read, let it leave you with this certainty. Everything that mattered did its work. Everything that needed to change has changed. And everything that needed to rest is at rest. No loose ends. No unfinished truth. No emotional debt. Just a quiet understanding that this chapter is complete.
Stay with me for this final moment. It's about to standing inside the meaning that has already formed. This is not reflection, it's not explanation, it's presence. The kind that exists when nothing is unresolved, nothing is pulling, and nothing is being carried out of habit instead of truth. There is a point of every emotional journey where you stop asking why something happened and start understanding what it shaped. That's where this part begins, not with questions but the steady.